In the fading light of a bygone era, an ancient empire stood at a precipice, its foundations shaken by the relentless march of a new world. For centuries, its heart had beaten to a rhythm of tradition, its soul steeped in the wisdom of ages. The quiet hum of artisan workshops, the scholarly debates in lantern-lit halls, and the imperial decrees that had governed generations were the very fabric of its existence. But now, from beyond the horizon, the roar of a different age was growing louder. The Industrial Revolution, a force of iron and steam, was reshaping nations, forging new powers, and casting long shadows across the globe. This empire, once a titan, found itself adrift in a sea of change. The West, with its booming factories, its formidable navies, and its insatiable hunger for markets and influence, was knocking at the gates. Their ships, black with coal smoke, brought not just exotic goods but also radical ideas that challenged the very core of the empire's identity. The old ways, once a source of strength and stability, now seemed like an anchor in a rising tide. The imperial court, a labyrinth of ceremony and protocol, was paralyzed by indecision. Some whispered of defiance, of closing the borders and preserving the purity of their heritage. Others, more pragmatic, argued that to resist was to perish. The pressure was immense, a slow, grinding force that exposed every crack in the empire's ancient facade. Its economy, built on agriculture and craftsmanship, faltered against the flood of mass-produced goods. Its military, once feared, was now outmatched by modern weaponry and tactics. A sense of unease settled over the land, a quiet anxiety that whispered in tea houses and echoed in the marketplace. The world was changing, and the empire, in its gilded slumber, was in danger of being left behind. The question was no longer if it should change, but how and if it could survive the transformation. Amidst this turmoil, a movement for reform began to stir. A new generation of scholars and officials, many of whom had traveled abroad or studied Western texts, saw the writing on the wall. They argued that the empire's survival depended on its ability to adapt, to borrow the strengths of the West without losing its own soul. It was a perilous balancing act, a tightrope walk between preservation and progress. Their voices, at first faint, grew into a chorus, demanding change. They proposed radical reforms of modern army, a new system of education, a government based on laws, not just the whims of rulers. The first steps were hesitant. New laws were drafted, inspired by Western legal codes, seeking to create a more transparent and predictable system of governance. They aimed to replace the old, often arbitrary, justice of magistrates with a system of written statutes and courts. This was a monumental shift, an attempt to fundamentally alter the relationship between the state and its people. For the first time, the idea that even the emperor might be subject to the law was whispered in the corridors of power. It was a concept as foreign as the steam engine, and just as revolutionary. Simultaneously, the call for educational reform echoed through the capital. The traditional curriculum, steeped in classical literature and philosophy, was deemed insufficient for the needs of a modern nation. Proponents of change called for schools that would teach science, mathematics, engineering, and foreign languages. They envisioned a new class of bureaucrats and officers, men who could negotiate with foreign diplomats, build railways, and command modern armies. The imperial examinations, the centuries-old pathway to power and prestige, were suddenly in question. Could a knowledge of ancient poetry truly equip a man to face the challenges of the 19th century? Resistance was immediate and fierce. The old guard, the conservative elites, whose power was intertwined with the traditional system, saw these reforms as a betrayal of their entire civilization. They viewed the new ideas as a corrupting foreign influence, a poison that would dilute the purity of their culture and undermine the authority of the throne. To them, the strength of the empire lay in its unique heritage, in the moral order and social harmony that had sustained it for millennia. Changing the laws was an affront to ancestral wisdom. Altering the education system was a heresy that threatened to sever the youth from their cultural roots. The clash between tradition and modernity played out not just in the imperial court, but in every town and village. In the quiet, lantern-lit streets, where life had followed the same patterns for generations, the new world was arriving. The sight of a foreigner, the sound of a steam whistle, the news of a new law passed in the distant capital law were signs of an unsettling transformation. Families were divided. A father, proud of his son's classical education, might find him secretly studying a forbidden Western text. A local official, loyal to the old ways, would find his authority challenged by new regulations he barely understood. The empire became a land of contradictions. In the coastal cities, new factories sprouted, their smokestacks piercing the sky, while just miles inland, farmers still tilled their fields with tools that had not changed in 1,000 years. Modern-clad students walked the same streets as robed scholars. The air was thick with both the scent of incense from ancient temples and the acrid smell of coal from new machines. It was an empire at war with itself, a society caught between two worlds, unable to fully embrace the new or let go of the old. The reformers pressed on, driven by a sense of desperate urgency. They established new schools, often in the face of violent opposition. They sent students abroad, hoping they would return as agents of change, armed with the knowledge of the West. They translated Western books on science, politics, and law, planting the seeds of new ideas in fertile, if sometimes hostile, ground. Every new railway line laid, every telegram wire strung, was a victory for the modernizers, a tangible connection to the wider world they sought to join. Yet, every step forward was met with a powerful backlash. The traditionalists mobilized their own networks of influence, using their positions in the bureaucracy and their moral authority to obstruct and sabotage the reforms. They argued that true strength came not from technology but from virtue, not from new laws but from old customs. They appealed to a deep-seated fear of chaos, warning that abandoning tradition would lead to the collapse of social order and the loss of everything that made their civilization great. The court became a battleground of competing ideologies, with the fate of millions hanging in the balance. In the midst of this grand, impersonal struggle, the lives of ordinary people were irrevocably altered. A craftsman whose family had made silk for generations might find himself out of work, his skills made obsolete by factory-produced textiles. A young woman, once destined for an arranged marriage and a life of domesticity, might hear tales of new schools for girls and dream of a different future. The old certainties were dissolving, replaced by a bewildering array of new possibilities and new dangers. Life became a navigation through a landscape of constant change, a daily negotiation between the familiar and the foreign. The empire, in its struggle, was like a great ship caught in a storm, its old sails torn, its rudder struggling to find a course. The crew was divided, arguing over which direction to steer, while the waves of global change crashed over the deck. There was no easy answer, no clear path forward. To modernize too quickly was to risk a violent break with the past, a cultural amnesia that could destroy the nation's soul. To move too slowly was to risk being consumed by the more powerful, more dynamic forces of the modern world. As the years passed, the struggle continued. The empire swayed back and forth, sometimes lurching towards reform, sometimes retreating into the comforting embrace of tradition. It was a slow, painful process, a societal fever that would last for decades. The lantern-lit streets of the old capital bore silent witness to this epic transformation. They saw the scholars in their long robes, the officials in their Western suits, the soldiers in their new uniforms, and the merchants with their foreign goods. They saw the hope and the fear, the ambition and the despair, the birth of a new era from the ashes of the old. The quiet, thoughtful moments of reflection in this twilight age held the destiny of a civilization. The world would not wait, and the empire, for all its ancient glory, had to find its new place under the sun, or be plunged into darkness forever. The journey was uncertain, the destination unknown, but the first fateful steps had been taken. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into the past compelling, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about the great turning points in history. Your support helps us continue to bring these moments to life. We'll see you in the next one. Have you ever considered how empires truly fall? It's not always with the clash of swords or the roar of cannons. Sometimes, it's a silent, creeping decay, a slow unraveling that begins not on the battlefield, but in quiet, candlelit rooms where accountants tally endless columns of numbers. The true weapon isn't steel, but debt. The story of the Ottoman Empire's decline is a stark reminder of this. It's a tale of how money, or the lack of it, can bring a global power to its knees, reshaping the world in ways that reverberate even today. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire was a titan, straddling 3 continents, a powerhouse of culture, science, and military might. Its treasury, filled with the wealth of conquered lands and bustling trade routes, seemed bottom. But by the mid-19th century, the world was changing. The Industrial Revolution in Europe was creating new forms of wealth and power, while the Ottomans found themselves struggling to keep pace. Wars, once a source of income, became a drain. The old systems were no longer enough. The empire needed to modernize its army, its bureaucracy, its infrastructure, and modernization costs a fortune. Imagine the Sultan in his grand palace, overlooking the Bosphorus, facing a dilemma. His advisors bring him ledgers filled with red ink. The state is spending far more than it earns. The traditional sources of revenue are drying up. There is a desperate need for railways, telegraph lines, modern warships, the sinews of a 19th century power. Where would the money come from? The answer lay across the Mediterranean, in the burgeoning financial centers of London and Paris. For the first time in its long history, the Ottoman Empire, the successor to Rome, turned to European bankers for a loan. The first foreign loan in 1854, taken to finance the Crimean War, seemed like a simple solution. It was a quick injection of cash, a way to bridge the gap. But it was also a Pandora's box. The initial success made it an addictive habit. One loan led to another, and then another. Each new loan was taken not just for new projects, but to pay the interest on the old ones. It was a classic debt spiral, but on an imperial scale. European financiers were more than happy to oblige, offering loans with tantalizingly easy terms. At least at first. They saw a vast, resource-rich empire, and they saw an opportunity. Think of it like this. A grand old family, living in a sprawling, magnificent estate, suddenly finds itself short on cash. So, they start pawning the silverware, then the paintings, then taking out mortgages on the land itself. At first, it maintains the illusion of wealth. The parties continue, the staff is paid. But behind the scenes, ownership is quietly slipping away. This is what was happening to the Ottoman Empire. The loans weren't just financial transactions. They were instruments of influence. With each new bond issued in London or Paris, a small piece of Ottoman sovereignty was being signed away. The money flowed into Istanbul, and for a time, there was a flurry of activity. Palaces were built, the military was equipped with new rifles, and a veneer of modernity was applied. But much of the borrowed money was squandered on lavish projects or lost to corruption. The underlying economy wasn't being fixed. The empire was borrowing to consume, not to invest in productive capacity that could generate future wealth and repay the debt. The interest rates were high, and the terms became stricter with each new loan. The bankers knew they had a desperate client. By the 1870s, the situation had become untenable. More than half of the state's entire annual revenue was being spent just to service the foreign debt. Imagine a government trying to function when every other dollar it collected was immediately sent abroad to its creditors. There was no money for schools, for roads, for the basic functions of the state. The empire was financially paralyzed. The grand viziers and ministers, poring over their books by flickering gaslight, could see the abyss. There was no way out. In 1875, the inevitable happened. The Ottoman government, in a moment of global financial shock, declared a sovereign default. It announced it could only pay half the interest it owed. The house of cards collapsed. European investors who had bought Ottoman bonds were furious. Their governments, representing their powerful financial classes, sprang into action. This wasn't just a financial matter anymore. It was a political crisis. The narrative in European capitals shifted. The sick man of Europe, as the empire was called, was now seen as an unreliable, mismanaged state that couldn't handle its own affairs. This default was the justification Europe had been waiting for. It was the key that unlocked the door to direct control. In 1881, the creditors forced the Sultan to accept the establishment of the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, or the OP. This wasn't just an advisory committee. It was a state within a state, an entire bureaucracy run by Europeans. 4 Europeans on Ottoman soil. Its mission was simple: to collect Ottoman taxes directly and ensure the foreign bondholders were paid first. The Opta was an unprecedented institution. Its officials, appointed by British, French, German, and other European powers, took control of the most lucrative sources of Ottoman revenue. They collected taxes on salt, silk, tobacco, spirits, and stamps. They had their own police force, their own offices, and they operated completely outside of Ottoman law. They effectively seized the empire's economic engine. All the wealth generated from these key monopolies flowed not to the Sultan's treasury to fund the empire, but directly into the coffers of the OPDA, to be sent to Paris, London, and Berlin. This was the quiet conquest. There were no invading armies marching on the capital, but the empire had lost its economic independence. The Sultan still sat on his throne, the flag still flew over the palaces, but the real power over the state's finances, the very lifeblood of the nation, was held by a group of foreign administrators. The Ottoman government had to go to the OPDA cap in hand to get an allowance from its own tax revenue. This humiliation was profound. It fueled resentment and a growing sense of nationalism among a new generation of Ottomans who saw their proud empire being dismantled piece by piece, not by but by accountants. The consequences were devastating, and the OPDA's control choked off any chance of genuine economic development guided by Ottoman priorities. Every decision was made through the lens of repaying debt, not building a nation. This economic subjugation made the empire politically vulnerable. When European powers wanted a concession, a railway contract, mining rights, or political influence, they had immense leverage. The empire's weakness invited aggression. Its territories were chipped away. Egypt was occupied by Britain, Tunisia by France, and the Balkans erupted in nationalist wars, often with the backing of European powers. The financial collapse was the prelude to the empire's final territorial disintegration. This story isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a powerful lesson about debt, sovereignty, and the hidden mechanics of power. It shows how financial dependency can be as potent a tool of control as any army. It's a somber tale of a great civilization that lost its way, not in a great battle, but in a series of quiet, fateful decisions made in desperation. The fall of the Ottoman Empire serves as a timeless warning. An empire that loses control of its treasury will soon find it has lost control of its destiny. The echoes of those candlelit accounting rooms and defaulted bonds shape the modern Middle East and remind us that the flow of money is, and always has been, one of history's most powerful and unrelenting currents. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into the hidden history of finance and empire compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories that explain the world we live in today. See you next time. The dawn breaks, but it doesn't bring the familiar warmth. Instead, a quiet, almost melancholic light filters through the ancient streets. Look around. The city is still, but it's a deceptive stillness. Beneath this calm facade, something profound is shifting. An empire is beginning to dream of different lives, different futures. In the quiet corners of coffee houses, in the hushed conversations of market stalls, new identities are being whispered into existence. It's a slow, quiet awakening, like the first tentative notes of a song that will soon swell into a chorus. For centuries, this empire was a mosaic, a collection of peoples held together by a shared history, a common faith, a single ruler. But now, the pieces of that mosaic are beginning to drift apart. From the mountains of the Balkans to the deserts of Arabia, a new question is on everyone's lips. Who are we? It's not a question of loyalty to the Sultan anymore, but a deeper inquiry into language, heritage, and destiny. Imagine a farmer in a small Balkan village. For generations, his family has paid their taxes, served in the army, and looked to the capital as the center of their world. But lately, he's been hearing stories of other kingdoms, of people who speak his language and share his customs, governing themselves. He starts to wonder, why should his son fight in a distant war for an empire that feels increasingly foreign? Why should his taxes go to a palace hundreds of miles away, when his own village needs a new well? These are not treasonous thoughts, not yet. They are seeds of a new consciousness, planted in the fertile ground of local pride and growing dissatisfaction. The old allegiances, once as solid as the mountains around him, are starting to feel like mist. In the bustling port cities, the feeling is different, but the effect is the same. Merchants who once prided themselves on their cosmopolitan connections now find themselves defined by their origins. A Greek ship owner, an Armenian banker, a Bulgarian trader, they start to see their fortunes tied not just to the empire's economy, but to the fate of their own people. The threads of commerce that once bound them together are now pulling them in separate directions, towards new national dreams. And this isn't just happening on the fringes. Even here, in the heart of the empire, the ground is unsteady. The old certainties are fading. The palace, once the unshakable center of power, is now a stage for political intrigue and desperate reforms. Generals whisper in shadowed courtyards, ministers plot their next move, and the Sultan himself seems to be navigating a ship in a storm without a compass. The attempts to modernize, to create a new, unified imperial citizen, often backfire, highlighting the very differences they were meant to erase. A new constitution is declared, promising equality for all, but for many, it's too little, too late. The promise of unity rings hollow when your language isn't taught in schools, when your history is overlooked. This is the great unraveling. It's not a single, dramatic event, but 1,000 small fractures, a million quiet moments of doubt. It's a story of an empire that is losing its soul, not to an external enemy, but to the very people who once gave it life. Each sunrise brings with it a little less unity, a little more uncertainty. The old songs of glory are being replaced by new anthems of independence, sung softly at first, but growing louder with each passing day. Let's travel south to the vast, sun-scorched lands of the Arabian Peninsula. Here, another story is unfolding. For centuries, the tribes of the desert lived by their own codes, their loyalty given to their sheiks and their clans. The empire's authority was a distant concept, a flag flying over a remote garrison. But now, a new idea, carried on the winds of change, is taking root: Arab nationalism. Scholars in Damascus and Beirut are rediscovering a shared literary and cultural heritage that predates the empire by centuries. They write poems and essays, not in the formal language of the court, but in the rich, vibrant Arabic of their ancestors. This cultural revival quickly becomes a political one. A young officer stationed in a dusty desert outpost begins to question his orders. He sees the poverty of his people, the neglect of his homeland, and he compares it to the wealth of the capital. He starts to believe that the destiny of the Arab people should be in their own hands. He dreams not of reforming the empire, but of breaking free from it, of creating a new state, a new union based on a shared language and a common identity. This isn't just about power, it's about dignity. It's about reclaiming a history and forging a future. The empire tries to respond. It builds railways, like the Hejaz Railway, meant to bind the Arab provinces closer to the center, to carry pilgrims to the holy cities and soldiers to enforce imperial will. But instead of a symbol of unity, the railway becomes a symbol of occupation. It becomes a target, a physical representation of a foreign power that can be disrupted, attacked, and ultimately defied. Each act of sabotage, each raid on a supply train, is a declaration of independence, a blow struck for a new Arab identity. Meanwhile, back in the Balkans, the whispers have grown into open revolt. What began as discontent over taxes and local autonomy has erupted into a full-blown struggle for nation. In the rugged mountains of Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece, rebels, known as Kumetaji or Haiduks, wage a guerrilla war. They are not a professional army. They are farmers, teachers, and priests who have taken up arms. They fight with a ferocity born of desperation and hope. They believe they are not just fighting for land, but for the very soul of their people. The empire's response is brutal. Entire villages are burned, and reprisals are swift and merciless. But the violence only hardens the resolve of the rebels and turns the local population against the imperial authorities. Every act of suppression creates more martyrs, more stories of heroism and sacrifice that are told and retold, fueling the fires of rebellion. The great powers of Europe, watching from the sidelines, see an opportunity. They offer support to the Balkan states, not out of any genuine sympathy, but to further their own strategic interests, to chip away at the empire's territory and influence. The Eastern Question, as it becomes known, dominates the diplomatic chessboards of London, Paris, and St. Petersburg. The fate of millions is being decided in ornate drawing rooms by men who have never set foot in the lands they are carving up. Within the empire's diverse cities, like Salonika or Smyrna, Communities that had lived side by side for generations are now driven apart by suspicion and fear. A Greek family looks at their Turkish neighbor not as a friend, but as a symbol of the ruling power. A Bulgarian man avoids the Jewish quarter, caught up in the new, toxic currents of nationalism. The shared spaces of the marketplace, the bathhouse, the cafe, one zones of peaceful coexistence, become fraught with tension. The empire's greatest strength, its multiculturalism, is becoming its fatal weakness. This isn't just a political or military collapse. It's a social and psychological one. The very idea of the empire, the shared identity that held it all together, is dissolving. It's like a grand old tapestry, woven over centuries, now being unraveled thread by thread. And each thread, Serb, Greek, Arab, Armenian, Kurd, wants to be woven into a new pattern, a new flag, a new nation. The tragedy is that in this rush to create new, pure national identities, the rich complexity of the old world is lost. The cosmopolitan spirit of the cities, where one could hear a dozen languages in a single street, begins to fade. The new world that is emerging will be simpler, more uniform, and in many ways, poorer for it. The dream of national liberation is a powerful and noble one, but it comes at a cost. The cost is the loss of a world where different cultures, religions, and peoples managed for a time to live together, to create something unique, something that we can now only look back on with a sense of wonder and sorrow. As the sun finally sets, casting long shadows across the silent city, we are left with a profound sense of an ending. The air is thick with the ghosts of what was, and the anxieties of what is to come. The old order is dying, and the new world is struggling to be born. The quiet streets, the fading light, the melancholic atmosphere, they are all a testament to this moment of transition. A funeral for an empire and a cradle for a dozen new nations. The mosaic is shattered, and the pieces now lie scattered, each one reflecting a different light, each one telling a different story. And the world will never be the same. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the twilight of an empire. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the pivotal moments of history. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories. We'll see you next time.